Um, Welcome to the first of 4 sessions of the Jewish Studies Center class on Pirkei Avos, the Pathways to Life. My name is Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the Jewish Studies Center treasurer. As treasurer, I want to tell you that all of our classes are free, and Rabbi Edelstein and our other wonderful teachers are all very knowledgeable and talented. However, we do have many expenses, paying for these Zoom services, for example, maintaining our website, other things. So donations are very much appreciated. You can donate on our website. Just click on the heading Donate. You can contribute with a credit card, with PayPal, or by sending us a check. Just go to the website and donate and fill out the form. Next, I want to cover a very few quick technical details. First of all, today's session is being recorded. Recording will almost always be on the speaker, but there might be glimpses of the audience. You can go off the video if you want, if you don't want your face to be shown. Everyone is currently and will be muted until the end of the presentation. We do welcome and encourage questions and comments, but please put them in the chat box and write them to everyone. Then people will see it. Other people will comment on your comment. Chat box is at the bottom of your screen if you're on the computer. One more thing, I have enabled transcripts. So people who are hard of hearing or can't understand my New York accent or the rabbi or something, you can just look at the transcript, and you can also save the transcript if you want. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our Vice President, Mindy Reiser, who in turn will introduce our instructor for the day, Rabbi Edelstein. Mindy?
Hi, everyone. We're delighted that you could join us, and we're looking forward to a very stimulating evening. Rabbi Yosef Edelstein is our teacher for this course, and he has been a specialist in Jewish education and outreach for nearly 30 years. He is currently the director of the DC branch of MEOR, a national Jewish organization that focuses on educating and inspiring university students through a connection to Jewish learning. He also hosts the podcast Rabbi E in 3, a short burst of Jewish wisdom, and I encourage you to learn what that is about. He and his wife have 4 children and 1 grandson, and they live in Silver Spring, Maryland. Before becoming a Jewish educator, Rabbi Edelstein earned a degree cum laude in English literature from Harvard College. He soon, however, began exploring his Jewish heritage more deeply. This led him to study in traditional yeshivot, which are schools of Jewish learning, in Jerusalem and in New York. And now we will turn to the rabbi himself.
Thank you so much, Mindy. I was really enjoying hearing about myself. Maybe at the end you'll say some more. Okay, actually that's not true, but it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Mindy, and thank you to everyone in the Jewish Studies Center. I don't know, I have to say Hakarata Tov. I have to express, gratitude to everyone, Jerry and the whole Jewish Studies Center, but also specifically to an old college friend from Harvard, Amy Schwartz. I don't know if she's here, but it's really due to her that I was given this really beautiful opportunity to take a break from college students, which is very much needed. I love them, they're wonderful, but it's nice to I used to, before I focused on college outreach, had more of a varied educational palette, because we used to live down in Savannah, Georgia, and I did learning with all kinds of age groups. Anyone been to Savannah, beautiful city. But in any case, so this is a wonderful treat for me, and I thank you all very much for coming, and I hope we'll have fun together. My wife always tells me, she gives me all the wisdom, any wisdom I have, and she says, please don't apologize for anything. But I do have to apologize for one thing, and that is that, well, no, not apologize, just a warning, and that is that I've been an educator for a long time, and during COVID, I even mastered Zoom. But this is, to date, the biggest Zoom class I've ever given. And thank God we have a Jewish Studies Center laying the ground rules, but I hope it'll be stimulating and interesting. I'm not a lecturer per se. I really like conversations and discussion and group learning, and we're going to do it here one way or the other. And tonight's the first of 4 classes, so you know, and an introductory one at that. So any mistakes we have due to me or anything else, we'll definitely clear up, God willing, before the next class. Okay, so you can call me Rabbi E. Yosef Edelstein is my name, and I guess I could start by saying, well, what this is not. And I say this with the full awareness that we Jews are opinionated. We know that, and our tradition says that. And we're vibrant and we're passionate. And 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 2 rabbis, 3 commentaries. I just made that one up, but you can make up your own quip. But the point is that there are many ways of looking at anything, obviously, in Jewish wisdom, Jewish literature. Everyone comes from a certain perspective. I like to hear from everybody. We can't cover everything, obviously, but so this is not per se going to focus on a lot of the historical background or context of the text called Pirkei Avos, which I'll introduce in a second. Is that important? Absolutely important, but that's not what I'm going to focus on. I'm not really a historian, and it does open up, certainly, many of the commentaries you can buy will give helpful, you know, brief biographies of the sages mentioned. That's really important. I'm not belittling it at all. I'm just saying that in this class, we're going to really just focus more on the nuggets of wisdom themselves and what they say to us and how they can live in our lives. Because Pirkei Avot, and I'm sure, again, and I also don't presume that I know more than anyone here. I mean, you know, smart people, Jewish people, access to lots of books and internet, and many of you might have quite an experience with Pirkei Avot, and that's wonderful. Of course, as we know from like the Torah reading every year, we repeat it, but there's always room for new angles and interpretations. So I don't presume that I know more than anybody. I share some of my ideas with you, and I would call it a broadly traditional perspective in some of the, you know, commentaries I'll bring up. That's not at all to discount other, you know, more radical ways of looking at things, for sure not. So I guess if it's not history, then what is this? Well, this is a class that's a Torah class. The word Torah, I'm sure you know, many of you, comes from the same word, morah. It means teaching or instruction. And famously, in our liturgy and different places, the great rabbis referred to, and it's in the prayers as well, right? Referred to this body of wisdom called Torah by adding on another word, Torat Chaim, which I think we should always remember. Torat Chaim, instructions for life. That's what it means, instructions for life. You could also tweak it maybe and say it's a living Torah, which it is, but Torat Chaim means literally instruction. So Pirkei Avos, I'm pleased to tell you, if you don't know, is one of the uniquely powerful individual texts within Torah literature that is really about life in its totality. Unlike other similar books. Let me explain in this at the beginning just a little bit. So we're studying this text together as Torah instructions for us how to live our life. And there's incredible complexity, there's incredible depths of wisdom and etymology and philosophy, and there is, and we'll touch on some of that probably, but ultimately, I hope we walk away, every one of us, myself included, with a little bit more clarity, inspiration, or even questions about how I can bring this wisdom into my life. Again, famously, the rabbis say, and it's actually in Pirkei Avos, it's in this Ethics of the Fathers or Chapters of the Fathers. We might get to it, not today, but one of the famous teachings is Lo ha-midrash ha-ikar ela ha-ma'aseh. the learning itself is not as essential as the doing, as the putting into practice of the learning. Liomod al manat la'asod, to learn in order to do. So again, doesn't mean every time we study a bit of Torah, we're immediately putting into practice, but this tractate, as it's called, it's a tractate, I'll explain in a second, really is one that we can put into practice in our worldview, in the way we look at the world and in our daily life, more than many other parts of Jewish wisdom. Why is that? Because, we're not that far away from Passover. Well, we are, but we have the Purim first, which is, can't wait for that. I guess I show my true stripes. It's my favorite day. I admit it's a beautiful holiday. Maybe one day I'll give a class about Purim. But anyway, I'm already inviting myself to more classes, Mindy. What am I doing? But we're not all that way far away from Passover. So Passover, we know.
You may regret that, Rabbi, what you said about Purim. We'll make you do that.
I love it. I already love this group, such friendly people. And the ones who don't have their cameras on, they might not be friendly, but I can't see them. No, you're all friendly, I know. I used to be a comedian, actually. When I was in college, I did a little comedy, and then I saw the light and became a rabbi. But why is this night different than all other nights? That's, of course, the Passover question. Why is this tractate of Mishna, Avot or Avos, different than all other tractates of Mishna? Most of you are probably very familiar with terminology, and we're not going to elongate the terminology, but the Mishnah was the bare bones written down version of what was called Torah She'ba'al Peh, the oral law. And it's a pillar of traditional Judaism that there are two Torahs, two Torot. Torah Shebektav, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and an accompanying I don't know, I'm going to say the word wrong, not a later invention, but along with that written law, the traditional understanding is that there were elaborations and explanations. That was called Torah She'ba'al Peh, an oral Torah, Torah by mouth. And the original intention, again, if this is elementary, I'm sorry, but the original intention was for that oral law to remain oral. Why would God choose such a thing? And that's an interesting class in itself, but it's a beautiful idea. But suffice it to say that, for more than 1,000 years, and again, I don't want to bog down in history, but from the time we date the revelation at Mount Sinai, 1312 BCE, that's the date we understand to be the 10 Commandments, as in Exodus chapter 19, 20, that was 1313 or 1312 BCE, whatever. Again, don't worry about the dates, but for more than 1,000 years, really almost 1,500 years, there was this two-part system, a written law and an oral tradition. It doesn't mean that, very quick, it doesn't mean that individual sages didn't keep notes. They kept notes, but the original intention was it should not be written down as a text. Okay, this is not a history class, but suffice it to say that other things came along, like Babylonians and Romans and persecutions and dislocation and exile. And ultimately, and there's an oversimplification of a long story, but ultimately a monumental historic decision was made by great sages of Israel as an emergency measure to write down the bare bones version of this oral law so it wouldn't be forgotten. And the first version of that written down oral law was called Mishna. Okay, no more history. Mishnah, okay? There's 63 books of Mishnah, tractates of Mishnah, Mesachet or Mesachta in Hebrew. Again, it's not important. Whatever, that's not my goal here, but just this tractate we're going to study when I get on with it, and I do. I eventually end my introductions. We'll get on with it. This tractate is different than all the other tractates of Mishnah. Radically so. Why? Because all of you might know this, all the other tractates of Mishnah, let's say they're more legalistic in the sense that they're more focused on details of individual mitzvot, commandments. Just so you know, there are 6 orders of Mishnah. One deals with agricultural laws, one with holidays, one with damages. That's where this tractate appears. We'll talk about that for a second, maybe. A tractate about laws of marriage, men and women in marriage, an order of Mishnah that deals with sacrifices in the temple, and then that deals with purity laws, many of which don't apply as much today. In any case, so there's 6 big sections of Mishnah, 63 books in 6 big sections, and one itty bitty little book called Pirkei Avos or Avot. And how is it different? It's different because it doesn't focus on details of individual mitzvot. As wonderful as those details are, and as important as they are, this is the tractate that focuses on klalim, or big overviews, if you will, of how we're supposed to live our lives. Ethical teachings. Now, not to get bogged down or confusing, you might say, wait, there's no other ethical teachings anywhere else in the Torah? Of course there are. In the Torah itself, there are, the 5 books itself. And later on, by the way, the elaboration of the Mishnah is called the Talmud, or the further analysis of Mishnah. So the final written down form, if you will, kind of course. But the bottom line is, so in the Talmud, there are many ethical discussions, but Mishnah is this very compact, it was really made to be memorized. It's very compact. It's important, but it's a detail. It already presumes there's something called saying the Shema, which the Torah itself talked about, and the Mishnah opens up with, when do we begin? Is it nightfall? Is it, right, okay. So that's the style of every Mishnah. It's very legalistic, very detailed. Masha Ein Kain, which means not like Pirkei Avos, which is big statements of how to live our lives. That's why, I'm not gonna say it's more important, well, actually, I wouldn't say it's more important, but in some ways, this tractate is more foundational than every other part of the Mishnah. And even the great sages say that. That's not my own idea. Because, and this is a point I want to mention, and then I will stop it. Yeah, in a second I'll stop if there are any questions in this point of introduction. But this is why this tractate is the most popular, right? Not that you all, I'm sure many of you are interested in details of Jewish law, but by and large, even if someone finds those details a little bit obscure or dry at different stages in life, this is a tractate, this is a book that everyone can relate to. And it really is, it's about our lives and how we lead and how we deal with other people, how we deal with ourselves. It also is very famous for the following reason as well. And that is, and why it's so well known. Almost every Siddur, almost every Jewish prayer book will have the copy of this tractate, Avos, Pirkei Avos, in the section on Shabbat. Shabbat afternoon, you will find the full text. I mean, I haven't seen every Siddur around, there's so many, but any reason, most Siddurim, and certainly traditional ones, will have the full text of this that we're going to study or talk, right, in the Sabbath afternoon section of the prayer book. I'm sure if we were in a classroom, I'd say, who knows why? And I'm sure many of you know why. We can't do that right now, but many of you might know why, but it's fascinating. And it leads me into the next point about a general point before we start to look at something, inside, as they say. Why is it in the prayer book? Why on Shabbat afternoon? I mean, yeah, it's a great piece of wisdom to study, but what's going on? So there's an ancient custom to study Avot, this tractate, in the weeks between Passover and Shavuot. And more broadly speaking, then there's a second custom all through the summer until Rosh Hashanah, but especially from Passover to Shavuot. There are 6 weeks intervening, or 6 Shabbats intervening between Passover, when we left Egypt as a people, and Shavuot, when we received the 10 Commandments and the Torah. There are 6 chapters in Avot. Really, there are 5, but a 6th one is not technically part of it, but it was added on. It's similar. It's not the exact tractate, but it's related to it. So it's become kind of, at least certainly in the prayer book, there's 6 chapters there. And every Shabbat between Passover and Shavuot, there's an ancient custom to read or study 1 chapter. Why? Why not between, Purim and Passover? Why not between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Because, and again, I'm sure many of you know this, but it leads into, a deeper level of preparing ourselves for this wonderful tractate. Because having being committed to or aware of the importance of our character traits. In Hebrew, the word is midot, but the way we act towards others, our behavior patterns, being aware of and sensitive to that is a prerequisite for the rest of the Torah. And so in the actual, in real time, when we left Egypt and we're trying to get away from all the residue of Egyptian culture and that society, we were literally, as a people, Moses was leading us with Aaron's help. We were purifying ourselves and trying to refine our character in preparation for meeting God at Mount Sinai, which we knew we were going to do. That wasn't a random occurrence, right? So the point is, even though they didn't have Pirkei Avos back then, right, in the same way, but like the idea was before God's going to give us commandments, we have to be a proper vessel. Our personalities have to be responsive and empathic. We have to be people who are like going to be able to use the details of the Torah and bring them to life in a proper way. In other words, to be mensches, to be good people. Basically, I mean, the Torah helps us become good people, but a certain prerequisite of like working on our character refinement. That's the idea. And if you want to think of it as a kind of metaphor, I don't think I originated this, but I've made it my own, but I probably saw it somewhere. But if you think of the Torah and all of its wisdom as fine wine. Hey, there's my Purim thing again. I can't. By the way, this is tea. I want people to know. You're thinking, Rabbi E, what are you drinking so eagerly? No, this is black tea. It's got nothing else, and I promise you. Okay. On Purim, it wouldn't be tea, but now it is tea. So the Torah is like fine wine. If you take a fine wine and put it in a very moldy, dusty, cobweb-filled container, well, it ain't going to do any favors to the wine. It might spoil the wine. It's certainly going to be a mess. It's not the right. So if you put Torah wisdom and commandments into vessels, us that are full of dirt and dust and cobwebs, characterly, speaking that way, then the Torah is not going to present itself in the proper way. Again, it's an imperfect analogy, and there's nothing all or nothing about life or Torah. But the point is that, like, the more we're, growth-oriented as people, the more the Torah can really take root in our lives as individuals and a society. So anyway, back to the point. That's why in the 6 weeks leading up to Shavuot, when we re-receive the Torah, there's an added emphasis on character refinement. So we study this tractate. And then the truth is it goes all the way to Rosh Hashanah, because there are, like I said, it's not as strict a custom, but many people read it one chapter a week, all the way from Passover to Rosh Hashanah. I'll tell you, there's another interesting idea given that, because those long Shabbat afternoons, what are the kids going to do? What are you going to do on those long Shabbat afternoons? Especially when the good weather is making people maybe feel a little wilder, or more wild. So study Pirkei Avos, study Ethics of the Fathers, just to keep, don't get too wild and crazy. That is also an idea given for why in the warm summer months Pirkei Avos was studied. Anyway, that's really the whole introduction, I think, in the sense that I've told you why it's very different than other tractates, why it's very popular and widespread, why any one of you, actually nowadays we live in such an incredible time, don't we? Like, not only the Jewish Study Center and Zoom, but like you can on your phone, on every device you want, you can get the whole Mishna, the whole Talmud. We live in unbelievable times in that way, the access to every part of it. I mean, you can get you can get some of the most deep, probably Kabbalistic books that I don't study, I don't understand, but like you can probably get them on your iPod and iPhone now. The well springs of Jewish wisdom have like unbelievably opened, and it's a wonderful thing. Anyway, so that's really, any questions about, could I ask that, Mindy? Just like, that was sort of a little bit of a history. Any questions about that? Oh, I should say one thing. Oh, last point, sorry, just for the detail. The Mishnah was completed, that the bare bones version of the oral law, of which this tractate is a part, was completed by the year 190 of the Common Era, the Talmud a few hundred years later. That's roughly, but that's, anyway. And so now when we say the oral law, we really mean the Mishnah and the Talmud, but we still need to come together and talk it out to really understand the spirit of the laws and the mitzvahs and everything like that. Anyway.
Okay, we're an experimental group here, and we modify things as we go. We're a small enough group that if anybody in their own words wants to ask the rabbi a question, go ahead. unmute yourself and speak out. If not, we'll move ahead, but we'll give you this
Thank you. Yeah.
little opportunity. I'm sure you'll have more questions later.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Okay.
All right, let's
it's,
move on. Let's move
Okay,
on.
great. No, fantastic. Wonderful. Okay, great. So, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers. Okay. Why is it called? Don't worry, we're gonna look at a text very soon. And that's what I really want to do. Most of the sessions is not going to be, right, this is all the background. Then it's just you and me and us and we looking at words of great sages. I'll explain right, who's talking in the book, whatever. But then we will, talk about them and process it. But why is this tractate, this book called Avot, which means literally fathers?
Mhm.
So a lot of answers, like everything, a lot of interpretation, a lot of ideas, not mutually exclusive. You could say that the statements, one idea, one common point, the statements recorded here are pearls of wisdom from the spiritual leaders, all men. Doesn't mean women weren't great Torah scholars. Many were, that is true. That's not, but all men's names recorded in the Mishna, who were leaders of the transmission of Torah law in their generations. So there are, as a people, there are spiritual fathers, parents, spiritual parents. Okay, but that's a beautiful idea, and certainly the names, many of them are familiar to you. From studying Mishna or Talmud, the names of the sages in Pirkei Avos, you'll see. But there's another beautiful idea too, at least one other beautiful idea, and I alluded to this before, because if, in a certain sense, the Torah is, most of the oral law is composed of details, very important details, but this tractate gives us general principles of life. And the word avot doesn't just mean fathers, which it does, it means general principles. So it's fascinating, right? So therefore, like for instance, very famously in the laws of Shabbat, there are 39 avot malachot. That means general concepts of work or creative activity, really, whatever you want. The 39 categories of things traditionally we don't do on Shabbat, they're called avot. What do you mean fathers? No, because they mean broad legal principles. And then the offshoots of that are called toldot, which means offspring. So anyway, so back to this tractate, we can think of it as statements of great spiritual parents to us, leaders, or we can think of it as general life principles that branch out into many, many, many details. And both are correct. Shelley, you look like you have a question. I have a good friend named Shelley who's tuning in.
I do. Thank you for noticing. So is it also the case that an Av, in the context of the Talmud, is like the primary source of something?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I meant. That's another, you're giving a good synonym of what I meant to say, meaning like those, yes, an Av is a primary source. So those primary source of Shabbat refraining from work laws are called Avot, the 39 Avot. And the Tolda is the offshoot of that. Yes. Now there might be another way you're thinking, Shelley, as well. I'm not, could be, but.
No, I think that's it. I think
okay.
You got what I was saying. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Let me stop for a second. If somebody wants to speak, it may be best to raise your hand electronically. If you go on the bottom of your screen, it says reactions, and the first thing there is raise hand. If you raise your hand, we'll see it on your picture. We'll also see it in the participants list, and that'll be a way for us to stop and address your question.
Thank you. Gilda wrote in the chat, malachot, correct. I said avot malachot, whether the malachot, which means work, quote unquote, or types of work. Maybe I said it improperly, but in any case, great. Okay, I'm sharing the screen with you now, and I'll say one other thing, and then we're not going to cover every Mishnah or every paragraph in Pirkei Avot. We can't do that. I'd love to. It would be fun. And this is not also a summary. I don't think, we could summarize, or I could summarize, what are the topics in Pirkei Avot? Well, they're how to deal with yourself, your fellow man, and fellow human being, and God. That covers it all. So like to summarize, the flavor and the depth and the beauty is in studying the individual teachings. So it's kind of, so we're not even going to go in, or I'm going to go tonight just with chapter 1. I might show you something else, but just to pick out a few of these paragraphs or individual teachings and talk about them and hear your, maybe even, obviously some discussion about it. Let me say one other thing, and then I really will start. We'll read the first one or part of the first one, because the first one has something else very, very unique. And it's important to look at it. But, in any case, I'm sharing with you the screen, Sefaria.org. I'm sure many of you know it. It's by no means the only online source of Jewish texts. It's a very good one. Yeah, and I said to the beautiful Jewish Studies group board that, perhaps in the future weeks in the class I'll make my own sheets, which might be nicer. I actually wanted for the first one to kind of show you Sefaria because it's really very handy. It's got tons of commentary. It's got English. It's got Hebrew. In any case, also easy to use. My one problem, it's not a problem, but this is another introductory point. But I'll just say, all translations are, I don't want to say problematic, that's not friendly. All translations are approximations. And translators have to make a decision, whether it's, and every book, whether it's Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, I mean, I'm saying part of their decisions might be based on their philosophy of Judaism, but I'm saying that there's no translation that's perfect. So I'm very sensitive to the fact that maybe some of you don't know Hebrew. I don't expect you to. But I'm going to sometimes, when we read a Mishnah together, I do want to point out, if I can, where I think a translation is not exact. And I'll just say, I'll show, for those who know the Hebrew, I'll show how I would translate it. And that's an advantage of making my own sheets. But because Sefaria, for all its wonderful virtues, some of the translations are, I would translate differently. Okay, fair enough. Last point, I mean this, and that is that who's going to be talking in this tractate? Who are the rabbis who are talking? They're basically the leaders, the leaders in terms of Jewish learning in the generations from the beginning of the Second Temple period all the way down to the Mishna. So over a period of several hundred years, again, not to get bogged down in time for those who, whatever, but I mean, if the Second Temple, there was a destruction of the First Temple. Jews were in exile. Second Temple begins construction roughly 352 BCE. I know there are also debates historically about some of the dating. In any case, so basically, this tractate has the greatest sages, the greatest hits of wisdom of the greatest sages from around 340 BCE to 120 CE, roughly. And again, look into it if you're interested, the history, and there are commentaries you can find that will really go through all that history. But so it's an amazing period of time in Jewish history, and it's not random why it starts here. I'll just say last point, it's not random, nothing's random, right? Okay, you know what, let's read the first Mishnah. That will make something a lot clearer. And we're not going to spend, I want to spend more time on some of the later ones in this chapter, but this one is unique because it's the first one of the tractate, and there's something more unique about it as well. Would anyone like to read, since we have a smaller group, I mean, would anyone like to read in English? If, where it says Moses received, I'm happy to give my voice a rest. Believe it or not, I don't like hearing myself speak. And if no one volunteers, I will read. Anyone? Should I, is there a chat person? Please start already. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, I like it. Glenn's like, get going. Okay. Okay, so here's where I'm going to just, I'm going to read it in Hebrew only because I don't like the translation, actually. I mean, it's not, that's wrong. Not, okay. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received Torah from Sinai, not at Sinai, from Sinai. Umisara liYoshua, and transmitted it, Torah, or passed it down, either way would be a good translation, to Joshua. Yoshua l'Zakanim, Joshua to the elders, Uzakanim l'Neviim, elders to the prophets, Uneviim, and the prophets, Misaruha, passed it down or transmitted it, the Torah, La'anshe Knesset Hagadola, to men of the great assembly. Haim Amru, these men of the great assembly said, Shlosha Devarim, three things. Hevu Misunim or Mitunim Badin, be deliberate in judgment. Vaha'amidu Talmidim Harbe, and raise up many students or disciples. Va'asu Siyag LaTorah, and make a fence for the Torah. Okay, now let me quickly do what's the second part of the Mishnah. The second part of this paragraph where it says what they said is what the rest of the tractate says. This rabbi said this rabbi said that. And this great assembly, which we'll talk about in 1 second for a minute, said 3 things. Actually, they said a lot more than 3 things, but these are the 3 things that were written in the Mishnah that they taught. But I just want to comment, I have to comment on something very interesting over here. It begins with a little encapsulated history of the receiving and the transmitting of Torah knowledge, Torah wisdom, from Moses all the way to the men of the Great Assembly, who I'll just say were the great sages at the beginning of the Second Temple period. It was like essentially the Supreme Court of the Jewish people in the time of Ezra, beginning with Ezra. So when the Jews came back, not all came back. Those of you who know history, fascinating. Most didn't, actually. A lot stayed in Babylon and built up Jewish life there in Torah centers. But anyway, Ezra and Nehemiah led people back to Israel, and they constituted a body of great sages called the Great Assembly. So that's around the year 345 or something like that. But here's my point, and then and I'll just say one other point. I don't want to get bogged down. Why are they called the Great Assembly? A lot of reasons, but they're very important because, as many of you know, I have a feeling probably a lot of people know Jewish history here. This was a watershed moment, the destruction of the first temple, and the Great Assembly really instituted a lot of what we know as, or started off, a flourishing of rabbinical enactments and law to try to reestablish Jewish life and Torah, and to reestablish Torah-based life in Israel on a stronger footing. So a lot of rabbinical enactments and decrees come from the Great Assembly and thereafter. And of course, even though the temple stood, the second temple was still a temple, but prophecy was also on the way out. And so therefore, as many of you know, this is a transition. I don't want to make too much of it because I don't necessarily, I mean, it wasn't like the temple service was only what Judaism was before. Never, no. There were always Torah sages in every generation. And there was a Sanhedrin, a Supreme Court of Torah sages who sat near the temple. But it's true, in the first temple period, for sure, the priestly service and that was a big center of Jewish life. The second temple was a temple, but already there was, it was on a lower level spiritually. That's an idea we're not going to talk about now, but prophecy was ending. So it was the beginning of a more greater emphasis on the oral law and on the sages as the leaders of the people. That is true. Anyway, not to get bogged down, but so the Great Assembly were very important. They kind of transitioned the Jewish people to, to a new reality. And like I said, a lot of rabbinical laws, were enacted by them. Okay, but here's the point. Sorry for my being lengthy. I'll try to be better about that. I believe tangents, but that wasn't a tangent, but I do believe tangents are really useful. Why does this tractate begin with a little history of the Torah going from Moses to the men of the Great Assembly? You might say, well, Rabbi, it's the beginning of the Mishnah. No, it's not the beginning of the Mishnah, meaning it's the beginning of this book of Mishnah. This is not the first book of Mishnah. This is smack in the middle. Right? If you look at Mishna, 63 books. I don't remember which number this is, but this is towards the end. This is like 40 something. This is not I would expect this little Moses received the Torah stuff and the first Mishnah of the oral law. Like that, if you're going to begin the oral law with a little description of the oral law, whatever it is, wonderful. Why do you wait Judah the Prince, who was the editor, Yehuda Nasi, the final editor of the Mishnah, he and the whatever, why did they put this little encapsulated history of the Torah in this tractate? It's strange. You hear the question? Again, there are a lot of answers, okay? But I'll give you one that's interesting and provocative and something that, and I'm quoting, and I don't want to get bogged, I know there are different levels here. I could show you, I could show you the word for word, the commentary, but I'll paraphrase it. I'm going to describe to you a very famous answer given by Rav Avadia of Bartanura, a very famous commentator on the Mishnah. Italian sage, lived in, I think, the 1400s or the 1300s. In any case, hold on, I'm going to look at chat. Andrew Ratner says, maybe it's because it's leading us through the limited perspectives they have that this is interpretation. I'm not sure it sounds like a very good thought, Andrew. I'm not sure. I don't want to mischaracterize what you're saying.
So essentially what I'm saying is like you have Moses, who's like receives the Torah from God. And then as this goes forward, there's a limited perspective because they're further away historically from God. And so
excellent point. So why then have, in order to accentuate the distance we've gone from Moses to when they're speaking?
Yeah, and I guess because of that, like they're sort of saying, this is when Moses got the Torah, he had access to the Israelites, and he was like, this is how you should live your lives, right? This is what God says. And then those kinds of things, like that's going to continue to pass down and pass down and pass down. And then the men of the Great Assembly are saying, this is what we know based on what's been passed down, which might have been like mutated or like, little pieces of, like playing telephone or whatever.
Oh, okay. I want to talk about that at some point. Good, Andrew, keep going.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, can I say, okay, is there anyone, excellent point. Yeah. First, I want to point out, okay, Andrew, you done? I don't want to cut you off.
I have an alternate view.
Okay, great. Who is this?
This is Bob Braun. I think what this is, it is a, if you think back to the calf and when they're wandering around and trying to get out of Egypt, and God was very upset when they built the golden calf. So they're saying, be patient in the administration of justice. That's the most important thing to me that's coming out of this. Raise many disciples. People should learn and go forward and don't abrogate, for lack of a better word, the Torah. But I think it's a reaction to that.
Right. So I see, first of all, I love everyone's comment is wonderful over here. I'm looking at the things, Shelley and Rima. All correct. I mean, all beautiful ideas. Deborah, for sure. Sam. So I see, and I do never want to slight anybody's, this is not my lecture class. So we don't have time to address everyone, but what everyone says is great. I want to point out before I forget over here, and you're all right, obviously, all making good points. What's funny though about what Andrew, because we started with Andrew for a second, and you brought up it's very important. And again, this is, even if I go, the point is not to cover ground in this class, it's have a good time learning together. So, but that's not just an excuse for delaying here. But first of all, Andrew said something that's not in the text. He said Moses got the Torah from God. It doesn't mention God at all in here. It says he received it from Sinai. Now, Andrew, whatever, that, and by the way, that is one of the famous questions. I should have said, I think it's implicit, but every great sage just about in Jewish history, wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos. Thousands, hundreds, the greatest sages of to the modern times, lecture on Pirkei Avos. So in any case, that's one of the most famous first questions on this Mishnah. Why does it say Moshe received Torah from God? It says from Sinai. But okay, and we're not going to answer every question, but it's funny, Andrew, because we do understand from the Torah it was God at Sinai, but why the Mishnah doesn't say God is an interesting question. But I do want to point out, I asked the question why, and everyone gave good answers. Why is this chain of transmission mentioned here? But listen to this, Andrew, and this just shows this is not at all. This is like a praise of you, nothing deficient. You gave almost the opposite answer as Rabbi Ovadia Bartanura. Hold on. Okay, thank you. Mindy, okay, you're right. Okay, you're right. My bad. I'm asking for too many comments. Okay, I'll try to go. I hear your point, Mindy. The Rabbi Ovadia Bartanura says almost the opposite of Andrew. He says like this. Every other tractate of Mishnah, I'm going to kind of know it's part of Torah knowledge because it's going to be talking about obscure things or ritual things that are part of the Torah, like Torah law, mitzvot, right? But this tractate doesn't talk about individual details. It's talking about philosophy kind of in life and how to be a good person. And all the different wise people of all the nations, Plato and Aristotle and Montaigne in later times. I mean, wise people write books about how to live their lives, how to live a good life. Listen to this, Andrew and everybody. We might think, the Bartanura, Ovadia Bartanura says, we might think Pirkei Avos is on that same level. It's the sage's own philosophy. It might be good or whatever, but no. This is also from Sinai. Meaning, it doesn't mean Moshe taught word for word what all these rabbis said, was taught word for word, but it means all the principles embedded in this tractate are part of the broad wisdom called Torah that Moses learned at Sinai. So it's not just their own personal philosophy, these great sages. It was part of an accepted body of wisdom, the basic perspectives. So it's that you hear that, Andrew, fascinating. So anyway, but you made a very good point, and Andrew made a very good point that there is an idea of the diminishing of a certain clarity as time goes on. Yeridos Hadoros, it's called, and that's one of the reasons why the Great Assembly made a lot of laws, because really what that means is that we weren't we were not on as high a spiritual level in the second temple as on the first temple. Now, by the way, you might say, wait, first temple, there was idolatry? Yes, there were problems, and that's another discussion. But at a certain level of clarity of transmission, the earlier you go, the better. So just, Andrew, you're quite right that's one of the reasons I wrote down the oral law. There was a little bit of forgetting, but I have to say one thing. Please forgive me, Mindy, and all you other patient people. Hope I haven't lost your patience with me. But Andrew said something I have to say because it's relevant to this Mishnah, because they mention when it says Moshe received Torah from Sinai, he passed it down to Joshua to the elders. That was not one generation, many generation of, by the way, elders doesn't just mean older people, it means wise people. So in every generation, in other words, there were Baalei Masorah, the leaders of the transmission. Everyone who wanted to could study Torah. I mean, if you could get away from your job. So there was never right. Torah is not elitist in that way, but there were people who, by dint of their diligence or whatever, became great leaders in every generation, and so they were the Baalei Masorah. Moses taught Torah to a lot of people. Everyone in the desert who wanted to learn came and heard him, but Joshua was his main disciple. And Joshua, okay, so this is many generations, elders to prophets. Again, I don't want to be too bogged down in the history, but the prophets it begins with the Samuel, the prophet, and we all know Isaiah and Ezekiel, all that era to the men of the Great Assembly. The Torah that Moshe received, we believe traditionally was the written law and the oral law. But I just want to say very quickly, and then we'll get on to some text for the last, and look at a few. Andrew mentioned telephone. I can't let that go by saying that even though that's a common way, Andrew, and I'm not saying you mean it in a simplistic way, but the passing down of the oral law is nothing like telephone. Telephone's the game you play as little kids, and of course the message gets garbled because it's a teacher telling a bunch of 7-year-olds something, and they only meaning it's a whole lecture in itself. I don't want to bore anyone, but the oral law was studied by thousands in every generation and studied day and night. Because I don't know if you ever peek your head sometimes in a yeshiva in Israel, the MEOR yeshiva in Jerusalem, round the clock, they take it seriously. So the oral law was studied by thousands, and there was now, Andrew, that doesn't mean there was never a diminishing of some of the information, but it's not like telephone where there's one line of transmission. There were hundreds of lines of transmission, and there was a filtering out, and there was a Sanhedrin for 1,000 years, a Supreme Court that ruled on things. I know it's a big topic, not for now, but the integrity of the oral law transmission was pretty awesome. And it's a thing to study on your own and really study it, but it was not some fuzzy thing. Only in later times, the Romans and those periods, the Mishnah itself says the first machloket, the first difficulty that couldn't be decided was late in the first temple period. Again, because they had a Sanhedrin and they had a Torah that helped them. Remember, the oral law is accompanied by a written law. So it's a two-part. Telephone doesn't have a little guide with notes as well, but we have a written Torah and an oral Torah. So my bottom line is, Andrew, maybe another time we can talk about it, telephone's an imprecise way of thinking of how the oral law was passed down. There's a famous, I love to give an example. And, this is not me, Rabbi E. I'm not at this level, but I just want to, like the great sages whose names are here, like, the Talmud famously says, the difference between a true servant of God and one who's not true servant of God is if you review the lesson 101 times and not 100. Now, that's not hyperbole. I mean, I'm telling you, it's not hyperbole. I don't do that, but that's why I'm not one of the great sages of the generation. But so the level of diligence and single-mindedness for those who devoted themselves to the law was amazing. Now, they weren't perfect. They're human beings, but okay, fine. What did they say? Now, I just want to point about this. This is a little bit unique to be patient in justice or judgment. You might say, every Mishna in Pirkei Avos, everyone speaks to us. But a couple of them, including this one, this first clause here, seems to have a particular relevance to actual judges. And that's true because, the rabbis were judges. The rabbis were rabbinical judges, and the greatest students of the oral law would themselves, be deciding cases. So when it says be patient in judgment, it doesn't only mean judges. Don't get them wrong. But definitely there's an idea there that when the Torah rabbis would be adjudicating laws, to be patient. And whoever made a very good comment about the dangers of impatience and hastiness. And so in the men of the Great Assembly were obviously, in every generation you have to be patient in administering justice. But remember, the men of the Great Assembly were at a pivotal time in Jewish history. Are we going to be able to get the integrity of Judaism back on track and Jewish law? So they said, be patient and deliberate in judging and raise up many disciples, because you can put you have one great student, but if that student is hauled off by the Romans, I hate to say it, then, so we're all raise many disciples and make a fence around the Torah. Hold on, I want to see if, I like the bona fides idea. Oh, good, I love the back and forth, that's wonderful. And make a fence around the Torah. That has, a certain idea of rabbinical law to protect Torah law. The rabbis made certain laws to, just an example. We're not going to get into this now, but again, the first mission was really just an introduction. I wanted to show you that transmission point. But make a fence around the law means, if you think something's very valuable or if something's dangerous, the first case, you have a lot of glass protecting the Mona Lisa, because you don't want to get too close to it, even though it's beautiful, because you might wreck it. It's not a perfect analogy, but if the Torah is very precious, then, and here it's more like violating the Torah is serious. So there I'll switch my metaphor. If you're riding on the Big Sur highway or some highway in Israel, you're glad there are guardrails there. I don't need a guardrail. I'll be careful. Whoa. If you get too close to the side of the road, God forbid, it could be bad. So a lot of the rabbinical law that the Great Assembly made were called, the Torah, by the way, gives them the authority to do this, a fence for the Torah. An example, a famous example, just like chicken and milk. There is nothing in the Torah itself there's nothing wrong with chicken and meat. It's basar v'chalav, meat, beef and milk. Aha, but the sages made a fence law. And they said chicken, oaf, and chalav, we should also avoid. It's not a Torah law, but it's a rabbinical law, so we don't come to violate Torah law. Now we could do, someone can say, well, I don't like that law. But that's the idea of a fence law. But I want to so even though, the focus in our class always is our lives. So yes, this first thing of the Great Assembly had a certain relevance to the judges of the time. But let's think of our own lives. Be patient in judging. Do we judge other people? Do we judge situations? I'll say for me. Do we make snap judgments and oftentimes are wrong? So certainly when it comes to people's motives, I was talking to a student today, and I'm dealing with college kids, a really great kid, great Jewish kid, very motivated, likes learning with us and other groups. And they had a little falling out with his roommate. And he's a really good, mature kid. And what I'm saying is obvious, we all do this. But he said, Rabbi, so-and-so said this to me, and I know he's thinking this. And I said to the person, his name is Preston. I said, Preston, you're a mind reader? You know what he's thinking? I said, I'm almost certain you don't. You're wrong about that. Because in my life, and I'm 3 times his age, I said to him, and I said, I've been wrong more than right when I make a judgment about someone's motivations. I mean, again, I'm not saying sometimes we can be right. So the rabbis are telling us, be deliberate in making judgments. And actually, throughout Pirkei Avos, There can be other statements about judging people favorably and just not rushing to judgment. So it applies to us. Raise up many disciples. You might say, well, I'm not a rabbi. Every Jew is a rabbi, even if you don't have the ordination. The Torah was given to the Jewish people. Mo Rasha Kehilas Yaakov. It's an inheritance for us. And literally, the sages really meant that. Every father, mother, person can raise up many disciples in sharing Torah wisdom, whether you have children or not. So I'm saying that is a beautiful lesson for us that also, right, and make a fence around the Torah. If any area of Judaism observance is important to you, or any moral value for that matter, making a fence is a good idea. Meaning you want to kind of like, again, the fence shouldn't be too big. Let me just quickly say that, right? Because someone could say, well, Rabbi, I think some of these rabbis made so many extra laws. They were very, truthfully, they were careful. The great sages were careful not to do that because they know we're people. We can't follow. You don't want to be so far away from the Mona Lisa, so to speak, that you can't enjoy it. So the Torah is a lifestyle of enjoying the world, enjoying our lives. But if something's really important to you, then you're not going to go to the very edge and say, yeah, well, I'll make sure I won't mess up. You're going to be a little bit careful. I mean, I think of my own example, just again, and then I'll stop for a second if you want to just comment on that. But like making a fence around the Torah, here's an example. Like, I mean, for myself, that's too personal. Okay, let's just say someone would be, you probably know, and we're going to hear about it in Pirkei Avos a little bit, but it's not considered a nice thing to say negative things about other people for no reason. It's called Lashon Hara, and it's it's considered a very serious thing, damaging you and the person you speak about. Now, if it's for a constructive purpose, it's a mitzvah. If you're trying to protect someone from harm, it's a mitzvah. You don't hesitate to say what you know that's dangerous about someone. But if it's just like, oh, I don't like the way he looks or Rabbi E's hair. I know my hair, my wife tells me I got to get a haircut. She's right. Okay. But Lashon Hara is not a good thing. So let's say you work somewhere where in the old days when people work together in live settings, let's say you're at a table and it should come back. Let's say there's a table where everyone tends to gossip and you take Lashon Hara seriously. So your fence is to not sit there at lunch. You don't have to be enemies with them, but like, you see, it's an obvious point, but like, that's a serious internal decision that I'm not because I know if I sit there, I'm going to get pulled into something I don't want to be pulled into. So that's the idea of making a fence around the Torah, I think, in the way I understand it on a personal level. Does anyone, Mindy, can I ask for a question? Should I go further? What do you want me to do? Should I learn a little more and then have a question, or what do you want to do? You're muted. I defer to wiser people
Folks,
than me.
if you have any questions, that's great, but make them short and pointed so we don't have that much time. We're going to go until 9:30, which gives us 20 minutes. So if you have questions,
Are people okay with that? Are people okay with that? Okay, great.
Ask them, but make them clear and concise.
By the way, the group mentioned to me, I'm totally open throughout the time of this class and long beyond to have people contact me, outside of class, email, call, whatever. That's what I'm here for. So like, whatever. But so if there are not any questions, I'd like to really sink our teeth into the second one. Okay, this is one over here that many of you know. I think they're tunes. I think people went to Jewish camps and they sang this song. It's one of the most famous pieces of wisdom probably in all of Pirkei Avos, and it's one of my personal favorites, if I can say it, because it's so foundational, I think. And I'll point out, you might know, right, and it's going to introduce, actually we already had a pattern that you'll see, and we can talk about it or think about it, that there are many things in Pirkei Avot that, guess what, everybody, are in threes. Threes. And that would make a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. So not everyone, but a lot of the wisdom is in three parts, A, B, and C. And that's true over here, and it's very important. So Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the righteous, Hayim Mishare Knesset HaGedola. He was of the remainder of the Great Assembly. Shimon the righteous was a fascinating person. He was the high priest for 40 years. He was the last surviving member of this great assembly that reestablished, Torah law and Torah in the land of Israel. Famously, you might know from the Talmud, it's said that he met Alexander the Great when Alexander the Great came to the Holy Land. And at least according to the Talmud says that he was quite impressed by Shimon HaTzadik, who was extremely pious and extremely, I never saw him, but I'm sure he was an impressive looking holy man and very kindly as well. But in any case, they say that he persuaded Alexander the Great to like not bother us, not harm us. And by the way, there was and you might know, it was a custom then, I think it's in that Talmudic section as well, that a whole generation, a lot of people named their children Alexander, out of gratitude that Alexander the Great, spared the temple or whatever like that. If you want this story, I think it's in the tract called Yuma, but anyway, the interesting story about Shimon HaTzadik, you can look into it. But he used to say three things. Oh, sorry, Hu Haya Omer, he used to say. And here's where, forgive me and forgive Safaria, but I'm just going to read it literally, and if that's okay. On three things the world stands. That's a good translation. Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omeid. Al HaTorah, on the Torah. Ve'al Ha'avodah, and on the service. Ve'al Gemilut Chasadim, and on acts of kindness. Now, the word chasadim, chasid, it can mean someone very pious, but the context of gimilut chasadim means really acts of loving kindness. In my opinion, that's a much better translation. So on three things the world stands: on the Torah, on the service, and on acts of loving kindness. I can't tell you how much I love this piece of wisdom, and I can tell you why, and I think it's really beautiful. Again, I don't want to talk too much, but I guess, okay, let's see. There's a lot to say about this. Okay, fantastic, Andrew Ratner, thank you so much. Good, define the terms, Rabbi E. Okay, well, first of all, everything needs to be defined, everybody. What does it mean the world stands on three things? What does that mean? It sounds nice, but Shimon could have said, there are three big things to remember. There are three, I don't know. He says on three things the world stands. So I'm just pointing out we have to define that maybe. On the Torah, okay. What about the Torah? Okay. But Andrew quite incisively pointed to the one that's the most ambiguous in a way. It says the word the service. Torah, we know it's Torah, control or wisdom, and we know acts of loving kindness. We got to talk about them. We know what they are, but beautiful Gilda. Thank you so much. Okay, so it's both things. So when Shimon HaTzadik lived, this is important, right? When Shimon HaTzadik, and by the way, again, never think, I told you, there are many interpretations of every word of Torah. And they're not all mutually exclusive. But for sure, when Shimon HaTzadik lectured in Jerusalem, it would have been fun to be there, right? And he said ha'avodah, it's almost certain his main meaning was the service in the temple. Ha'avodah meant the sacrificial service in the temple. The definite article would suggest that, the service, not just avodah. Avodah can mean, the word avodah can mean work, like work in a field, but ha'avodah in context surely meant, I'm not saying only meant, but the service. So that means the Torah, the world stands on, whatever that means, the Torah, the sacrifices in the temple, and acts of loving kindness. Now, Gilda, I think it was, very nicely brought us up to the more modern era, which is easier to deal with. But because, well, I mean, right, now you might say, well, my gosh, hold on. Whatever exactly the importance of the sacrifices were, and they were important, right? But we don't have a temple now. So that means two of the three things the world stands on, we don't have anymore. No, Gilda's right. Because the word avodah never only had one meaning. Avodah also stood for, it also meant prayer. For two reasons. Because first of all, in the temple service, there was prayer. I mean, there wasn't the prayer, right? Remember when the temple stood, it wasn't like a synagogue like nowadays. The prayer was not as formalized. Around none of the great assembly times when they formalized a lot of the 3 times a day prayer. But in any case, the word avodah also made prayer because the Torah at one point refers to serving God with your heart. And the oral tradition explains service of the heart is prayer. And so, and the temple itself, even right, the temple itself was a place of prayer, even if it wasn't formalized prayer. People came there and poured out their hearts to God like they do now at the Western Wall. So, so in other words, Shimon HaTzadik said the service, but it certainly had a connotation also of prayer. But just what Gilda's point, now that the temple is gone, the Talmud tells us explicitly, as do all the sources, that the most close resemblance to the temple service is the structure of prayer today. And it takes the place in some way, why that is, we can talk about, of the temple service. Hold on, I want to see. Avoidance service. Okay, Rachel, beautiful. Okay, great. Now, Rachel says a good point. Excellent. I don't want to exclude that. I would say, just from my learning, the two main understandings are temple service and prayer. But yes, there's also valid interpretation that avoda means, well, you said service to others, but that's going to be kind of gimilut chasadim. In other words, gimilut chasadim means all those acts of kindness and charity to others. That is a catch-all phrase. We can go to visiting sick people, making people feel good, lending them money. That's all gimilut chasadim. So avoda, I'm not sure there, it might not be the work itself of excellence. Andrew, excellent, right? Very good. I mean, what I was going to say, again, everyone, you're all amazing. When I just tell you things, it's not like, oh, these are right, you're not. No. I've seen the idea that, a beautiful idea that some say is that the word avoda, it means kind of all the way of serving God that's not act of kindness to others or Torah study. So all the kind of mitzvot service, a lot of which do involve other people. Avoidance interaction with God. What does that mean, Sam? If you want to.
Sorry.
Oh, maybe you just mean interaction with God.
Yeah, interaction with God.
Ah, beautiful. Excellent point. Right. And that would make sense. I'll tell you why. That would make beautiful sense because, very good, because, right, logically, Shimon HaTzadik is going to have three categories. And let's just say, even though someone said about service to others, good point, but let's just say kindness to others is that catch-all value that means sanctifying your interpersonal relationships, treating other people with benevolence and kindness, right? So then the word avodah would really be more focused on that all kind of interaction or connection of a person to God. And that makes sense because the temple was, what was the temple? It was, yes, people gathered in groups, but the temple was a connection between us and God, the Beit HaMikdash. By the way, I must point out, this week's Torah portion on Shabbat is Truma. It's the building of the tabernacle, which was the forerunner of the temple. So it's very beautiful. And the point of the temple was to have a living, palpable connection as much as possible with the Jewish people and God, and to be a symbol of everything else. But I mean, like, that's right. And when it wasn't serving that purpose, it was destroyed, right? But the point is so beautiful. So you could really say that, but why do I love this so much? Because let me tell you, if I could, and again, I love your chat, just let me know if you want to add. You know why I love this? Because it's so comprehensive. Because if there are many times the rabbis give us checklists, if you will, of like, because like there's 613 commandments. It's hard to keep all of those straight. And we don't, no individual does anyway. But like the point is, and the rabbis even say, we need sometimes succinct summaries of like what we should focus on. Well, I think Shimon HaTzadik is giving us one of the most incredible, succinct summaries of our lives, of our own world. It says the world stands upon three things. Well, there's some commentaries that say it means God created everything for the sake of these three things. Literally, this world was founded for the study of the Torah, the connection of human beings to God, and for acts of kindness between human beings. Those are like the three major foundational principles of creation. That's one way of understanding it. But another way, which is no less beautiful, but just as beautiful, and every one of us is an olam katan, a small world, a microcosm, every human being. And if we want our world to stand firm, steady in a spiritual sense, these are the three broad principles. Torah, its study and its wisdom in our lives, a prayer connection to God, whatever level, and doing kindness for our fellow human being. Like, if you think about it, it covers everything. I mean, in terms of, and I'll just say that's what, very famously, the Maharal from Prague, a very great rabbi in the 1600s, chief rabbi of Prague, one of the deepest thinkers in Jewish thought, ever, right? He points out commonly, but with this Mishna, that we really have three relationships or dimensions in our life, all of which are important to try to perfect as best we can. Our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with God, our relationship with other human beings. And so think about it. This is what he said, that the way he explains it, plug it in. Which of these three, and now they all work for each thing, don't get me wrong, meaning every one of these three things, Torah, prayer or temple service, and loving kindness, it helps all the things, but which is the principle that's the one that's helping us complete ourselves, which helps us complete our relationship with God, and which helps us perfect our relationship with our fellow human beings? It's interesting if you try to line it up. Well, I think acts of loving kindness, clearly that's interpersonal, meaning that kind of brings holiness, elevation to my interpersonal life. Of course, I have other relationships, like I'm doing kindness, there's never an opportunity, never not an opportunity to do kindness with someone. Right? A great Hasidic rabbi said, if you don't do one kindness a day to another person, you haven't lived your life. And I hope I can live up to that for the rest of my life. I mean, I don't, even if you don't have access to Torah study, you can always do a kindness for someone. Prayer is absolutely the person, avoda shebalev. It's one's own inner life, trying to connect to the creator or something higher and to yourself, right? But like, it's definitely working on that axis of human being to God. And Torah study and wisdom, fascinatingly, is about opening. I mean, again, this is the way the Maharal understands it. We can fit it other ways, and Torah study opens my eyes to who am I? Who am I in this world? What am I doing here? I mean, the biggest sense. And just Torah study is fun. It brings simcha to your heart when you do it, especially with other beautiful people like you guys. So Torah kind of gives wholesomeness to your inner life, prayer to your relationship to God, and kindness to other people. Again, they all go back and forth, because prayer also teaches you about yourself. And when I do kindness for others, I'm seeing the godliness in them. So of course, it's not only one ABC linking up, but I do think it's beautiful to think of Shimon HaTzadik as really giving us kind of like the quick checklist of how to be stable spiritually in this world as each one of us. And it's not quantity. He doesn't say quantity. He doesn't say, study 20 hours a day. I mean, I don't study 20 hours a day. The Vilna Gaon did, actually, the great rabbi in Vilna in the 1700s, but I don't do that. Okay, but if you study a tiny bit of Torah, it's beautiful, it's precious, and in a regular way. I mean, and prayer doesn't mean you have to go to services. Doesn't mean you have to read Hebrew. I mean, again, those are beautiful things in Jewish prayer, but avoda means your inner connection and then acts of kindness. Any comments on that? Yeah, any comments about that Mishnah?
What?
Boring.
Really?
What's that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Look, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Could you put your comment in chat so we could see it?
I can say one other thing while we're waiting for that. Another beautiful way of breaking down this teaching is intellect, emotion, physical expression, right? Torah is supremely intellectual in that sense. Prayer is emotional. Not only, Torah should be learned with enthusiasm, and prayer should be done with thought too. So it's not only art, but you can see that Torah is kind of a malach, brain. Prayer is leiv, heart, and gimilut chasadim is your goof, your body. By the way, I'll tell you beautifully, tzedakah, we know how important tzedakah is, but the Talmud famously says, chesed, gimilut chasadim is greater than tzedakah. Tzedakah is for poorer people. Rich people don't need your tzedakah. They need chesed. They need kindness often, so chesed is a broader concept than tzedakah, as great as tzedakah is. Right, if you don't have any money, what if you don't have money to give tzedakah, but you can give a smile to someone, you can open a door for someone, you can call someone. Chesed is one of the most precious things. I mean, olam chesed yibaneh. The world was built on kindliness, and that's one of the verses actually that the Rashi and some of the great commentators bring, meaning like each of these things, right, I'm not getting too technical, but there are verses in the Torah and Tanakh that suggest that God created the world for the Torah, God created the world for prayer, and God created the world for kindness. I can show you those. I didn't want to get that detailed necessarily, but so we only have 5 more minutes left. You know what? Well, let's do one more short one. Why not in this chapter, if that's okay? I'll show you a famous one. Yeah, let's do a famous one right here. And again, I know that, like I said, I'm not necessarily, maybe the next class I'll be a little bit more thematic. I can be for sure, but like for the first class, it hasn't been that way necessarily. But I think this is a nice one to end with, you know, because Hillel, the great Rabbi Hillel, here, one of the most famous statements, many of us have heard it. And it's also one of the unique ones in Pirkei Avos because it's a little bit more enigmatic in the way he says it, right? Hu haya omer, he used to say, it was Hillel, because we already had a few comments of Hillel before. Hu haya omer, im ein ani li, mi li. If I am not for me, who is for me? Uchisha'ani la'atzmi, and when I am for myself, ma'ani, what am I? V'im lo achshav ematai, and if not now, when? Wow. What do you say about that? I don't want to, I mean, it's interesting because, again, I'm glad I'm doing this one actually in a certain way because it's funny. It also is built on a three here, ABC, but the reason why it's not just random, because Shimon HaTzadik gave us a big picture view. This is also a big picture view, even though it's a little bit, you know, funny in the question, but this is also not focusing on one trait. Like some of the teachings in Pirkei Avos we'll see can just be one trait. Like don't get angry very easily. That's, you know, that's going to be a statement later on in Pirkei Avos. But Hillel is giving us also a big picture of kind of our lives. What would you say about this? Let's finish. Let's hear some. If I am not for me, who is for me? And when I'm for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So I can share with you, again, I'm not just jump in so I don't, you know, it's getting late anyway, but I mean, this is one where you can imagine there are a lot of interesting commentaries. Deep Hasidic commentary is true, but I think you see a beautiful idea here. Just, first of all, just like we'll see a theme throughout Pirkei Avos of balance. The Torah is about balance. It's not just about praying to God. It's about helping your fellow human being. It's not just being a good neighbor. It's about having a meditative relationship with God if you know, to the extent you can. So it's a very balanced approach. Aha. Okay, oh good, I see some great things over here. What am I is about my morality, ethical contact. Oh, Shelley, can you explain? But
yeah,
go on.
I'm trying to contrast what am I
and
is
who
really
am I? Right.
Versus who am I? And I think in our contemporary world, where we're so caught up in identity, and this is telling us that the focus should be more on our character and our behavior, and that the what am I is what kind of person am I? What kind of human being? Not who is my identity this week or next week.
Right. However, Roz, I think you're totally right. But Roz is making a good point that it does begin with taking ownership of the ani, of the I. Now, there are many ways to learn it, really. There really are, Shelley. But like, in other words, this is so interesting. Like, if I'm not going to take, most of the commentaries explain, if I'm not going to take responsibility to bring out the unique ani that is me, who's going to do it for me? No one. So, and you know, so much of Judaism does start, think about it. First of all, Adam is created singular. And the rabbis make a big deal about that, right? It wasn't a species, it was Adam, an individual, but both male and female at first originally, the Talmud says. But like, meaning the individual is so important. Our faith, starts with Avram Avinu, one patriarch, right? And Sarah Meno, right? But one power couple, right? So, but Shelley, you're totally right. Not in the sense of then once you have that ownership, or again, there's a lot to say. Once you take, because your first order of responsibility is to try to sanctify yourself, but what's it leading towards? The second step is, but when I'm doing it here in Hebrew, you see, in English, it doesn't, they translate here in a good way to try to give out the connotation, because li just means for myself. Yeah, atzmi means to myself alone. It has more of the connotation of if the purpose of my self-development is just for my own atzmius, my own selfhood, then what am I? That's what you're, I think, saying, Shelley. But every one of us, so it's a balance, definitely. You see, it's a balance. You can't abrogate the ani. Oh, I'm gonna just nullify myself. What do you mean? Nullify yourself. You're a precious human being created in God's image with a unique mission in the world. But are you doing it la'atzmi? Are you doing it just for your own? You see what I'm saying? I agree with you, Shelley, that in our time, I think there's in so many levels, there's an overemphasis on identity. I see it in young kids because nowadays, especially, there's so many ways of self-expression and they're beautiful, all these things. I mean, I'm not saying everything's beautiful out there, but there's so many creative people, but people get so worked up. Am I expressing, who I really am? I mean, I don't think Hillel wanted us to get bogged down with that. He wanted us to bring out our unique traits and not stifle them. That's for sure. Humility doesn't mean, and you know this, Shelley. So I'm just saying, you take the ani and you sublimate it to the greater good of the people, the world, humanity, the Jewish people, all those things. And then the ani is being directed, all its talent and energy, to something bigger than just atzmi. And then finally, and if not now, when? I'll just share, that's a beautiful point. We know it doesn't just mean don't procrastinate. Don't procrastinate. We all tend to put off. I was reading a beautiful commentary today I just want to share, because it's a beautiful idea. It's and obviously I know on every level we know, try to do the things that are important, do them. But I have a tendency, I think, when it comes to many important things, you say well, it's not the best time to do that. I'll wait for a more opportune time, or I'll wait for a calmer time. But the great rabbis, including Hillel, are saying, well, wait. First of all, you don't know the calmer time will ever come. Hopefully it will, but you don't know. So those things that are important, and here he's really talking about your mission in life. And again, I mean, it's not a one-day decision, but you're bringing out the best you can. Don't put it off, and also that every day is unique. So even if you say, well, okay, I'll start tomorrow, but wait, today was a special, unique time. Just like you're a unique person, every day, every minute is special. And it does, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to finish we're gonna have a famous Mishna later on. You're not expected to finish the job, but you have to try your best. And every day has its unique opportunity. Now, believe me, I, Rabbi E, confess, I've wasted a lot of days. God forbid. I mean, we're all human beings, but Hillel's telling us a beautiful idea that and I love how he says it. He was famous for his humility. Stories abound in the Talmud about his incredible humility and kindness. He could not be fazed. People tried. A few students tried to play a joke. Erev Shabbat, when he was getting ready for Shabbat, they tried to annoy him with useless questions, and he was generous and patient. He didn't get upset. So don't try that with me. I'm warning you, everybody. Okay, but in any case, so Hillel, in a beautifully understated way, because he's not giving us a lecture be important. He's just asking us, if you're not going to be if you're not, I don't want to say cheerleader, if you're not going to be your advocate to bring out your greatness, you can't depend on anyone else to do it. But don't think it's only for yourself. And that, it doesn't berate us. He just says, if that's how you're living, what are you really? Are you really anything? I mean, however you read that tone of his question, but you've really become kind of a nothing if you're making your big self about yourself. But if you take your greatness and direct it to the good of the world and something bigger, then you're really doing something. And then finally, and if not now, when? He would have been that great, smiling, I'm sure, patient, warm rabbi. But the message is good. And I'll stop with that because it's late. Any questions or final comments?
Well, look, this I think has just been splendid. And Rabbi, you've done a fabulous job of integrating people's observations within the flow of your ideas. And I think we'll look forward to a wonderful series of discourses in the weeks to come.
I appreciate that, Mindy, very much. And I'm open to your suggestions on what you'd like, whatever, how to make it work for people.
Now, any final comments, Rabbi?
This was wonderful. I just think we had a great introduction. We really did talk about a lot of ideas, and these are fundamental ideas for life. Thank you, Shali, so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
And look, enjoy, study more, come back with more ideas, more questions. That's the best.
Remember also, the next class is 2 weeks from now, not next week, but 2 weeks from now. And
build up the excitement, right? Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you.
So I want to thank you, Rabbi, for a bit of a exciting class. You're not a passive speaker at all.
Did I wear you out though, Jerry? That's the question. I wear you people out.
Thank Roz for helping out.
Let me interrupt. There's one person who's been very quiet and deliberately so, but I really want to thank Vivian, who's a member of the board of directors and has really played an important role in having it all. So a cheer for Vivian.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you so much.
This whole program is Vivian's idea. She's saying Jewish study should include religious study, and we should really be studying something rather than learning some aspect of Jewish history. So
that's beautiful, Vivian. So special, really. Thank you, and it's a privilege to be with you people. Really, really.
So
amazing.
We'll see you all in 2 weeks, and be safe, be happy, and donate to the study center.
Yes.